In a conversation with a friend yesterday, I was sharing about some of the boundaries that I'd put in place over the years with, um, in particular with family. And as I was sitting with that this morning, what I can now see is how much of an overcorrection um, a lot of those boundaries were. And so I'm just going to unpack, where my October the 29th, 2025 thinking is on this, because it's an evolving perspective. But, what I'm seeing today is, it was probably about 15 years ago that I first really got in tune with, kind of my inner wounding and where it was rooted. Um, and then I started making intentional choices about, um, you know, how I would spend my time, or, things that triggered me, how I would respond to those. And what I now relate to is putting up some boundaries. It meant, kind of being very measured in, kind of time with different people in my life that I would feel overwhelmed around, and family, was a big part of that. And it wasn't until I started, I think back to my first time going to therapy in 2018 and starting to get some relationship between, kind of people in my life and overwhelm and my relationship to the insomnia that I had been navigating for about 15 years at that point. And, just the havoc that was wrecking or putting on my nervous system. And now, having, been, kind of 5 years clear of insomnia, I can look back and see that so many of the reactive actions that I've taken throughout the course of my life have been in response to my nervous system not being regulated. In those places, something happens, and the space between my, kind of that stimulus and my response is like nothing. What has shifted, and now with 5 years of perspective to look at it through, is I can see that those same circumstances, or even ones that are more challenging, I know I have a space each morning. I sit right out here and I give myself the gift of that space every day, so that whatever is happening in life, I don't have an expectation that I need to respond to it right then. If anything, I can communicate that I'll respond the next morning, because that's the space that I know I'm most clear. After a good night's sleep and after space of sitting with something, just like I'm sitting with this idea of boundaries right now, that's usually where the messages come through the most clearly to me. And so, kind of what came through in my reflection of this morning is, when I think about some of those boundaries now, some of them like, kind of 10 years removed from where I'm at today, I can see how I had an awareness of, kind of my response to this inner wounding. And to feel safe, I would create space between me and anyone, who triggered that. And in some cases, that meant just spending less time with people I love, but who, kind of brought up feelings that I wasn't fully capable of navigating in those moments. In other cases, it just meant, kind of cutting out relationships. In some cases, these would be friendships or business relationships, but, I didn't have enough awareness to, fully understand what I was navigating in those relationships. And so I would put up a boundary just for self-protection. What I'm now seeing is that those were overcorrections. 2025 Jeremy would deal with those in some much different ways. It wouldn't, an example is I live next door to my family. Some of those same things that were affecting me in 2015 still affect me in 2025. I'm just communicating or showing up differently. Right now I'm navigating some, kind of challenges, and I'm experiencing more grace between us. And it's beautiful, and it's just a reflection of those overcorrections from the past. Because what I see is that, those weren't the truth. Those were, my way of feeling safe in that moment. And so, just what I'm thinking, in this moment as I'm, unpacking these for myself is, where were all those other places that I overcorrected? I think back over the last 5 years, I had 2 beautiful and really meaningful relationships. And what I recognize is in each of those, there were some boundaries that I put up. And they reflected them back to me pretty clearly. Like they're, one of the words that came up in both of those relationships was the word rigid. Probably pretty well deserved. Like when I look back on it, typically when that word would come up, it wasn't in a space that I could process or deal with it. Usually I was in full overwhelm and in a lot of fear. Anytime, a lot of things were coming at me historically, kind of things to do with fear of not sleeping. 18 years of insomnia builds up a lot of, kind of fear response to sleep, kind of fear around money. I've navigated cycles of financial challenges over and over again. A fear of just not being able to deal with feelings I wasn't aware of that were coming up. Fear of being controlled, or losing my freedom. Though a lot of those types of things, kind of compounding together, would create me to revert back to some boundaries that probably occurred like walls and may have been walls. And in those situations had me be perceived as rigid. Fair enough. Now I can look back and I can see, how that experience would have been created. When I think about how I navigate this moving forward, it really does come down to, okay, in this moment that I'm in, there's the stimulus. So what is causing me to feel overwhelmed? Giving myself the space. So now I trust, having, kind of created space first thing in the morning each day for the past 5 years. I trust that space is consistently going to be there and I can relax into it. It means I sleep at night. It also means that I'm trusting the messages that come to me in that space that help give me clarity on what next to do. And so that's the space that I'm coming from. It has been allowing me to take advantage of opportunities, that in the past I might have, I stayed clear of just because of, kind of fear of overwhelm, fear of, uncertainty. And it's just to say that I'm getting a bit better on some of these things. Those boundaries that I put up in the past, I now relate to as overcorrections. My nervous system just hadn't gotten to the space where I felt safe to create a pause and a space. It created that immediate response. And yeah, so past me, I have a lot of compassion for him. He hadn't figured out what was really, kind of writing his story at that moment. Present day me, today some awareness came through in terms of, kind of what's actually unfolded here. And for, kind of future me, what a gift that, I can see now this pattern that's shown up, and it gives me a bit more presence in terms of interrupting that and creating a future with, just more love versus fear. All right. Thanks for listening to this.